extremely warm welcome to all of you who are joining us from whichever time zone, whichever continent, whichever geography. You are very, very welcome. And the title of today's session is Inclusive Technologies for Learners, the Nigerian Perspective. And we have quite a gathering of panelists with us today. We have Professor Jane Agbu from the National Open University of Nigeria. We have Mr. Eloka Oduah, also from NOUN, the National Open University of Nigeria. And also Mr. Lucky Pastor, also from NOUN, the National Open University of Nigeria. And myself, Dr. Emma Pauncefort, whom you will have seen in some videos and heard plenty of my voice, those of you who've been following the Digital Literacy Lab for Educators MOOC content. We also have supporting, and thank you very much to my colleagues, Dr. Kirk Paris over in Canada from the Commonwealth of Learning, Miss Kushin Feng, also from the Commonwealth of Learning over in Canada, and Dr. Alex Grech from the 3CL Foundation in Malta. So to set the scene for today's session, 15% of the world's population, or 1 billion people, are said to have a form of disability according to the UN figures, so a very significant proportion. And what we're really doing today is we're gathering to think about why we don't think about more this very important part of population and how we can do better to be more inclusive, both in the here and now, but also as we're envisioning for the future of digital tools and really leveraging their power. We're very, very fortunate to have Eloka and Lucky, who are going to share their experiences with us and guide us. And I'm very sure we'll learn a huge amount about how we need to guide ourselves through to those next chapters. A housekeeping note before we proceed on. The session will be recorded, so if you miss anything, don't worry, there will be the opportunity to come back and review any of the material. And also just to really encourage you to make the most of this as a live session. This is for you to really ask questions, share experiences as well. So we'd really encourage you to post questions throughout in the chat, and we'll try and field those and respond to them as we can throughout the next 60, 90 minutes or so. So to get us into this topic of inclusive technologies, a question for us all, perhaps one that we haven't thought about at all, or maybe enough. So a poll to set us out, the question that we're wanting to ask is this: to what extent are digital technologies inclusive in your opinion? I'm going to launch the poll now. And you will have options ranging from extremely inclusive, going down to somewhat inclusive, neutral, or no effect, not very inclusive, not at all inclusive, or not sure. So I'd be very interested to hear what you've got to say, and we'll of course respond to this over the coming discussion. So do go ahead, and if there are any problems accessing or seeing where the poll is, then please do interject. So give a few moments for everyone to respond. You can see there's a few hands raised, so if there's any issues that we can address or any questions, do go ahead and post them in the chat, and we'll address any sort of technical queries or issues, and any content will come to those as and when, as soon as possible. So we've got a bit of a split at the moment. We've got a split between 4 options. Majority of people have voted. I'll give a few more moments and then we'll move forward and think about how we place this poll in context. And I'm sure Eloka and Lucky will have much to say and to respond and identify whether what we're thinking is actually the case in essence. Great. Okay, so I can see that the majority of us have voted. So thank you very much to those who've participated. So we have quite an interesting split. We have about half of us thinking that digital technologies are somewhat inclusive, so inclusive to a certain extent. We have a fifth of us thinking that they're very inclusive. A few people feeling that there's, neither inclusive or not inclusive, and another fifth not very inclusive. So some interesting results there with the weight of people. So nearly 3/4 of us saying that there is a significant level of inclusivity in digital technologies. So there's the results so that you can see them also. So as you can see, there's a, roughly sort of 3/4 thinking about inclusivity. Okay, so without further ado, now let's really interrogate these views and thoughts so far by really taking on the hands-on experience of our other panelists. So at this point, it's a huge pleasure to hand over to Jane to introduce Eloka and Lucky and to get us further warmed up for our discussion today. So Jane, over to you, and do gesture to me as I go through the slides when you need them.
Oh, thank you, Emma, and warm greetings to everyone, and welcome to this live session. I'm Jane Agbu. I'm from Nigeria. And like Emma noted, this session is going to focus on inclusive technology for learners with case studies from Nigeria. Yes, so you will recall that in my introductory video 2 weeks ago, I noted that inclusivity in our digital world entails not only access to internet, but also the availability of the software, hardware, digital content and services, including policy provisions. So for the case of people living with disabilities, an inclusive technology, an inclusive digital world will be one that allows all learners to engage actively without feeling left out. Research also shows that, that there is indeed a digital divide, but all disabilities are not equally disadvantaged. We were made to understand that the most digitally disadvantaged disability group are actually the visually challenged group. And this brings me to the motivation for this topic, inclusivity in our digital world. It is actually born out of my encounter with Eloka and Pastor that will be joining us today. And I hope that you have taken time to watch and listen to their videos. There you have a little bit of insights on their yearnings, their challenges and aspirations as regard to digital inclusiveness. So as in the course of my work at the National Open University of Nigeria, currently I coordinate a center. I'm a director in a center, and the Eloka and the pastor came seeking for admission into one of our programs. And specifically, they wanted to know how they could be included and accommodated to run our program. Eloka finally was able to get admission, but lucky because he's currently undergoing a one-year compulsory National Youth Service Corps, his admission was deferred till next year. So after his national service, hopefully he will join us at the National Open University of Nigeria. So providing teaching and learning experience for Eloka opened up a whole new world for me in this area. And one may ask, for example, currently I have 6,090 active students in my center, including Eloka and another lady called known as Faith. And we will be tempted to ask, why bother on 2 students when I'm also supposed to focus more on 6,088 students? And the response is, why not? No one should be left behind. Everybody must count. And we are all learning about digital literacy skills. We are all participants in this course. And we are actually privileged because we are included already. But Eloka, Faith, and Pastor are still asking for access and inclusivity in this digital world. So as teachers, we need to really ponder on that so that we will focus on things that matter. So let me quickly introduce Eloka. Eloka is currently a master's student of peace studies and conflict resolution at the National Open University of Nigeria. He is also a podcaster, and his podcast is known as Eclectic. In the course of my experiences and challenges towards providing teaching and learning for Eloka, I had to engage him in series of interviews in order to know how to accommodate him and get him more included. And he noted, I will quote from one of the interview sessions I had with him. For my studies at the National Open University of Nigeria, I read the e-copy version of my course material. I have a software in my computer called Job Access with Speech, JAWS. This is a screen reader that assists me in my studies and recreation. JAWS is not actually free, but there's another type of screen reader that helps, and it is known as Non-Visual Desktop Access, NVDA, and this is free. So we usually visit the blindhelp.net website for further assistance. Also, in Windows, there is a screen reader called Narrator, though I personally prefer JAWS, noted Eloka. And also, phones also have screen readers, of which some examples are TalkBack, Shine Plus, VoiceOver, and so on. So with my earpiece, I can engage in my educational and recreational activities with the aid of these softwares. Also, by introduction, I want to also introduce Lucky at this point. Lucky is currently a youth corps member serving at the Federal Capital Territory School for the Blind Children in Abuja, Nigeria. He instructs computer skills to students who were once sighted and in regular schools before they lost their sight. And his aim is to help them navigate the digital world. Lucky is a poet, he's a singer, he's a writer, and he just published his book entitled Braving the Storm. And one of the interview I extracted online regarding him, he quoted, "When I go to church and everybody takes turn to read Bible verse, I will be skipped because I am blind." And I kept asking myself, how do I get included? I trained myself on how to read from my laptop with the JAWS program. and I got included in the Bible reading session, and my frustrations got turned to fulfillment. I must confess that this statement broke my heart. Pastor simply asked, how do I get included? As educators, consciously or unconsciously, we tend not to give the issues of inclusivity the much attention it deserves. And the resilience of this special group is really amazing and infectious. And they seem to have made it a point of duty to teach themselves, to teach each other how to survive in our complex digital world. And we can learn a lot from them. This course, our present course, Digital Literacy Lab, is referred to as a lab. And one may ask, what makes a good lab? What makes a great lab? We were made to understand that a great lab is where we discover new methods of producing scientific knowledge, new approaches to training researchers, the innovations and excitement surrounding an emerging idea, and most centrally, the presence of gifted individuals with the personality and vision to make things happen. So we are going to, our instructions is going to be focused on the here and now. And the first question we're going to pose to Eloka and Zoom video conferencing in the here and now. How inclusive is the Zoom video conferencing? We shouldn't take that for granted. We have all logged in. I remember when Eloka was trying to log in, we had to navigate him to tell him to shift your screen to this side so that he can see, he can be properly, his face can be properly viewed. And it is a sign of non-inclusion because we had to depend on us to guide him and so on. So we will want to hear from them. The Zoom video conferencing platform, is it okay for them? Are they coping? How are they included? And so on. We are also going to be navigating on very important question, also in the here and now. How inclusive is this course, the digital learning, the digital lab, this present course, how inclusive is it? Both the platform and the content, and how have they been able to navigate that? What has been the challenges and what could we have done better? I encouraged them to register for the course, and they have been part of the participants for this course. We want to know what their challenges are. I really didn't ponder much on this until Lucky sent me a voice message on how he's been able to navigate this course and how challenging it's been for him, and also looking at the way forward. I discussed that with Emma, and we agreed that we're going to throw it out and ask Lucky and Pastor and Eloka if there are things we need to tweak in the course of this MOOC in order to make the platform and the program to learn a bit about their work. Currently, they are both instructors for the blind children, specifically teaching them digital skills. We're also looking at the significance of the digital world to this in general. And stop here. I don't know, Emma, you want to take it from there, or you want me to continue with the questions?
That's a superb introduction and further very rich context. Thank you, Jane. And just to reiterate what we were saying before we started the webinar, Eloka and Lucky, it's really inspiring to hear about all of your activities, and really looking forward to learning more. So Jane, shall we dive in with, we've been talking about the here and now. So there's two parts, isn't there, to the, we were discussing about the literacy lab for educators, and indeed, you know, our session right now, we want I suppose there's two questions, as you were saying, what can we do at the moment, or what can we interrogate? And then the next stage of thinking, what can we envision, which is what the course is going to come to do. So over to you, Jane, for those first sets of questions about Zoom, what we're using right now. Jane and Eloka and Lucky, please jump in at this point. What has it been for you? What has it been like for you? Not this experience coming on this call, but also, I suppose, especially over the pandemic, because of course we are in exceptional, challenging circumstances where there's been a greater requirement or greater use of these tools. So what's been your experience, whether it's a pandemic specific experience or just generally? Please do share your insights. Maybe Eloka, would you like to share first?
Okay, thank you very much. I personally, my experience with Zoom has been somewhat fine. I say somewhat because when we're talking about inclusivity in terms of the digital space, in my mind, I'm thinking I should be able to do everything I need to do within this space, independent of a human aid, a human guide. Now that is lacking within the Zoom space, and I'd explain why I say it's lacking here. Getting the link to join this particular Zoom call wasn't difficult. The process was okay because of the aid of my screen reader. I was able to click on the link and then get to this point where I am. The challenge I have with it currently, and I've had this challenge ever since I started using the Zoom platform, is that because most things are now done online, the physical meetings have been reduced drastically. Then I never had to worry about if I'm, properly positioned and all that kind of stuff, because it's a physical location and I believe everyone can see me. But using the Zoom app, I always have to rely on either someone physically present with me here or someone else on the other side of the call to tell me if I'm holding my phone properly. So you can imagine if, for instance, I happen to join a meeting late for some reason or whatever, I may be holding my phone at an odd angle and no one can see my face. So for that reason, I don't feel as included as I should be. So if it were possible that there is a face recognition app or something added to this particular app that tells you when your face is in focus, it would go a great deal in helping with that feeling of being included. I don't need to ask someone, can you see my face? Am I holding the phone properly? And all of that kind of questions.
That's a really, really, really important point. And just before you went on to talk about face recognition apps, my question, and then Jane, please jump in. My question was going to be, is it that us, I suppose well, I don't want to presuppose what your thoughts would be, but a question of everybody else thinking more and being mindful of the things that might be more less accessible for yourself, or is it that is the weight of work to be done there in raising awareness and mindfulness, or is it that we need to really accelerate what digital technologies can do and harnessing, for example, face recognition to bring it into this sort of platform? What do you think, Eloka? Where's the main body of work that needs to be done?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get your question.
Oh, no, let me reframe it. It was a lengthy question. So we've got two, I suppose, two solutions or routes to a solution to this problem. One, raising awareness of individuals. So for example, when we came on, we could have, onto this call, we could have said to you, oh, just to let you know, we can't see you that well, just like we might do to one another in a call. You know, someone might say to me, actually, I can't see, the light is too bright behind you, for example. So you know, something that we might do otherwise. So is that where we need to work, all of us need to work much harder? Or is it that we need to really, and at the same time, really push the integration of new technologies such as face recognition into these calls? So where do you see, what's the first step? I suppose that's the short question. In your mind, what are the quick wins? What are the things we could do first to make quick progress for you?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. In the interim, I think the first thing to do would be to raise the level of awareness. Just like you rightly pointed out, yeah. I am pretty sure when I first came on the call, you all couldn't see my face, but nobody bothered to say, I can't see you properly. I had to ask, can you see me? So raising the level of awareness to start with would go a long way in helping the process of inclusion. But you would recall when I was answering my first question, I said, in my mind, the inclusion of a visually impaired person in the digital space, in my mind, I am thinking it has to be independent of a human aid. So while we are raising the level of awareness, it's also very important that new technologies will be developed to aid with this inclusion, so that just in case, because sometimes you may have a lot on your mind and it really doesn't cross your mind. Like I gave in the other example, it could be a large meeting and no one remembers to say, oh, I can't see you properly, or whatever reason, actually, whatever reason. So this technology is going to help to make you feel part of the process when it's developed. So the first thing, like I said, is awareness. And then moving forwards, eventually the technology would have to come in.
Thank you. No, that's beautifully articulated, and I have made notes that, you know, that's a really important learning point. Jane, follow up from your side.
Yeah, I'm wondering if Lucky has been able to join us. He went off for some time.
I was just looking.
Not yet.
I can't.
Yeah, I've messaged Jane. So he's disappeared. So I'm not sure if he can return or if there's a way to access or contact him.
Oh, okay. Okay. So thank you, Eloka. I really appreciate your insight, because these are things we take for granted, you know, until it happened to us a few minutes ago when you logged in and we're like, oh, okay, we can see you properly. And like you noted, we didn't even remember to urge you to position your camera properly until you asked, are you seeing me properly? Okay, so these are some of the insights, some of the things we usually take for granted, but we really need to start looking into that. We need to raise awareness in this area, and there's a need for development of softwares that could assist in that area. So I also want to ask, maybe go back to straight to our second question. The course, I encouraged you and Lucky to log in last week. I don't know if you have issues navigating the course, or there are things you need us to do better. I hope you're enjoying the course. I think in my earlier discussion with you, you said Lucky has been more deep into the course, but I don't know whether you have any thoughts for us so far?
It's rather unfortunate Lucky is not online right now, because just like you rightly mentioned, he's the one who had to do a lot of in-depth study and going through the course proper. I've had problem with time. That's why I haven't really gone through the course that much. But I was able to register. I got registered, and the process wasn't difficult at all. Where I think you're really concerned about is the course itself. If there are challenges I'm facing at the moment navigating around the course, and which unfortunately I may not be able to give very good answers to that, because I have not really explored as much as Lucky has. He has been the one who explored to a reasonable level.
Yeah, so we're going to step down this question. We're hoping that Lucky will join us because he's quite enthusiastic about this particular issue. So I want to also go straight to the next question. In my discussions with you, you said that you've been an instructor, a digital instructor with the School for the Blind Children for quite some time before you joined us at the National Open University of Nigeria. And we're curious, we want to know how the experiences have been. What actually do you teach and how do you go about that? And what areas of digital skills and literacies do you impact on the children?
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Jane. Like you rightly pointed out, I was a computer instructor at FCT School for the Blind, Jabi, before I had to, I was a volunteer there before I had to take a break to come run this master's program with National Open University. So while I was there, it actually is very, very important for persons with visual impairment to be able to use the computer and use it effectively. We can all see that the advent of COVID, the pandemic, has even made it more important that you have the digital knowledge and computer skills to be able to interact with the world as it were. So while at the school, we got to, I say we actually because Lucky does the same thing. We got to teaching the students how to operate the computer as a blind person. Computer appreciation for a blind person is not the same. Sorry? Did you say something?
Go on.
Okay.
No, it's okay. Go on.
Computer appreciation for a blind person is not the same for those who are sighted. And the simple reason for this is because the sighted people make use of the mouse to navigate their way around the computer, while as a blind person, you are solely dependent on the keyboard. And using the keyboard to perform the tasks you need to perform on the computer requires some level of knowledge on how to use the keystrokes. For instance, if you want to create a folder on your desktop, you may be, as a sighted person, you would use the mouse and click on whatever icon you are supposed to click on to get that done. But as a visually impaired person, since you can't use the mouse, you need to know what those keystrokes are to get that task performed. So you press Ctrl-Shift-N, and then it opens a dialog box where you type in the name of the folder you want to create, and then you just hit your Enter key, and then your folder is created. And this is just a practical example I'm giving as regards to how computer appreciation for the blind is different for a sighted person. So having known that you need to know the required key combinations or keystrokes, as it were, to be able to use the computer, we also go forward to teaching them how to use the various Microsoft packages, PowerPoint, Word, and Excel, and how to get on the internet and source for information, how to do your research, and how to verify the information you've gotten. You don't just read from one particular source. To verify if your information is credible, you need to check other sources, and always look out for credible sources when you are surfing the internet. So basically, like I said, all these are done using the keyboard, not the mouse. I never used the mouse in, say, I think 9 years now since I've been introduced to the computer. And I've been going online, I've been performing various other tasks that I am able to perform. And just to add, sometimes certain tasks within the digital space, how do I explain this now? Okay, performing some of these tasks, like I said, depends largely on your knowledge of the keystrokes you would need to use to perform these tasks. So it's really a daunting job instructing how to navigate your way around the keyboard and the computer as a visually impaired person.
Okay. Eloka?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. I'm curious, you mentioned something about how to navigate the internet and the sourcing for news. How do you identify fake news, and how do you sift it out? How do you know which one is the right one and the fake one?
Okay, like I said, when you search for a particular topic or information, whatever it is you're searching for, and the search results brings back options for you to go through. When you read one, you shouldn't just be okay reading just one. You try to read as many as possible from different sources, different sites. That way you get to, if you have, say, for instance, if you read from 5 different sites and you have 3 giving you similar reports, then I think it's safe to say that it's a credible information. But if you have those 3 not giving you what you originally thought was correct, then the percentage which is higher would now be what you would lean on more.
Okay. So thank you so much, Eloka. Thank you. So I want to go straight to the other question: the significance of the digital world to visually impaired individual, and the significance of embracing digital literacy skills. So I think, do you have any take on that?
Yes, please. Thank you very much for that question. At this point, I'd like to state here that it's very significant. The significance of the digital literacy or digital space cannot be overemphasized, because it opens a wide spectrum of opportunities, and the plethora of information you get in the digital space, I don't think it can be quantified. I'll give you a practical example with myself. As a blind person, it's common that you should be able to study using Braille. And all through my primary and secondary education, I used Braille to study. It was just when I was almost done with my secondary education, I was introduced to technology. And I saw the massive difference between the kind and level of information I can get using Braille and using the digital space. The reason for this is, here in Nigeria, I'll speak for Nigeria. I don't know what's obtainable in other parts of the world, but here in Nigeria, we have certain organizations who Braille the textbooks we use for our studies. Now, because of how bulky the Braille is, and the fact that it costs quite a lot to be able to Braille different kind of textbooks, it limits your scope. You cannot read wide. All you can read is all you've asked them to Braille. If you're brailing a particular textbook written by a particular author, that is all you'd have until you ask them to Braille another author. And sometimes they tell you that they can't Braille that particular book, or for whatever reason, I'm not sure. But with the digital world, when you are able to gain access to the internet, you can read as many sources as possible, as many as you can carry, as many as your capacity to understand would let you do. So by virtue of that, you are able to access more information, you are more enlightened, and yeah, your knowledge is greatly increased. You're not just restricted to one particular author by virtue of the inability to get as many Braille copies as possible.
Thank you. So, this is quite interesting, really.
And like I said,
because,
even if you get as many Braille copies as possible, it consumes a space. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Eloka. It is quite insightful, because sometimes the Braille can be quite bulky. And like you mentioned earlier, you read, it limits your scope, but the digital space gives you more access. It expands what you read. And also because of the jaw readers and so on, you can download what you want to read and read through the screen with your voice platform, software. Okay. So let me go to the last question. How inclusive do you think the digital world is to you as a visually impaired person? Do you feel it is completely inclusive, maybe from your perspective, from your experiences and so on?
Thank you very much for that. Like I rightly pointed out at the start of this meeting, I wouldn't say it's completely inclusive, and for obvious reasons, of which I made reference to the inability for me to independently know that my face is in focus when it comes to using this particular Zoom app. There are also areas, there are also areas where you find limitations as a result of visual impairment. Areas, for instance, you have graphics on a screen, and maybe there are certain materials you are studying and there are pictures. Now the JAWS screen reader does not describe what that picture is. So in that area, you are excluded from knowing what exactly is in that particular material. If it's not text, JAWS won't read it. Okay?
Yeah.
And yes, so those are two I could think of right now off the top of my head. I'm sure there are others, but for some reason, I just really can't call any to mind. But for now, these two are a serious challenge. It makes me as an individual feel like I'm not completely carried along.
Yeah.
I feel my sighted counterparts have more advantage than I do when it comes to areas like that.
Thank you so much, Eloka. I'm sure that all of us have learned so much from you, okay? And also for us as teachers, these are most of the things we take for granted. We recall that in Lucky's introduction video, he encouraged us as teachers that when we come to a class, we should look out for special students like him. Don't just assume that everybody in the class is sighted, okay? And specifically when you write on the board, don't just point on the board, explain it to him because he can't see the board, okay? So we really need to continue discussions on this because these are quite really very important for all of us as teachers. So, and we really appreciate the fact that Eloka could join us today because we learn better when we're hearing it from the person that wears the shoe. Such a person knows how it pinches and where it pinches. So Emma, I don't know if there are some comments on the chat that we need to look at or work on.
Yes, thank you, Jane, and thank you, Eloka. Again, I'm very busily taking notes so that I can be mindful and remember all of your insights, Eloka. Thank you so much. And thank you for very forward-sightedly looking ahead in terms of the content of the course, because certainly that consumption of material and what you were talking about in terms of encouraging that lateral reading skill, reading across sources, putting a source in context is such an important point and an area that we're going to come to very soon. So it's really super to have had that highlighted. So a few questions that we've got. Some of them are to do with infrastructure. Some of them are to do with hardware questions. We've been talking quite a lot about the use of software that can support your learning. And then I've also got a question about the power of audio and how audio helps us learn. So perhaps I can start with some of the hardware questions or the more perhaps, the questions related to that. So there's one. So you were talking, Eloka, about how you use a keyboard very extensively to navigate your way round. And there's a question here about what adaptations of a standard keyboard are made for your purposes. Is there braille on the keyboard? How does that work? So quite an interesting that question.
Yes, actually. No, there are no adaptations, there are no braille inscriptions, I beg your pardon. There are no braille inscriptions on the keyboard. It's just your regular keyboard as you as a sighted person use to type. So what is done is that you introduce for a person who is just getting, for a visually impaired person who is just getting to use the computer for the first time, you sort of do a kind of orientation on the keyboard layout, how it's arranged and the different keys and all of that. So when you are able to do that, depending on how fast the individual is in learning, you can then start teaching the person how to type properly placing your fingers on the home keys. I am sure you know where the home keys are located. So once you're able to place your fingers on the home key and then you familiarize yourself with the different directions of where the keys are, you're as good as done. You're able to type effectively and you know where all the keys are, and you can use whatever key combinations you wish to use to perform the task you are intending to perform.
Interesting, thank you. That's a really important point. Before I take some further questions, if I may jump in with my question about audio for learning, it's something that I'm really interested in and also was really interested to hear about your podcast projects and adventures. So there's lots of research that talks about the power of audio for all of us to learn well in terms of immersion and the way in which audio devices in terms of storytelling and narrative are very powerful in terms of creating human connection and exploring new ideas. So my question is, and it's a question I've been asking myself when I've been creating content, would audio alone with, added in sound design, so enhancements that would be included with text. Do you think that have you found, given that's the predominant way in which you consume information, what I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with all that research? Is it the case that audio is very powerful and has the power to do so much? So the question, do we need all the visuals as well? But quite a broad ranging question, but love to hear your thoughts on that as a podcaster as well.
Okay. You cannot deny the fact that audio, which predominantly refers to spoken words, really, has a very, very influencing power on the mind. Okay. But in terms of learning, people learn differently. And I'm going to speak from the perspective of a visually impaired person, having been in conversation with other visually impaired people. Some people actually do prefer to read Braille. Some prefer to use a computer and reading with the JAWS, the screen reader called JAWS, and other forms of screen readers. So in terms of learning, I think it depends on the individual, what they are more comfortable with in consuming learning materials. But like I said, the power of audio is very, very influential. Another challenge I might have personally with using audio to study is that it's time consuming. Yes, it's time consuming. I recall when I was in secondary school, like I said, I used the Braille a lot, and I also used a tape recorder. I recorded most of the lessons while the teacher was delivering the lessons. But then I found out that finding the time to play back a lesson of 40 minutes or 1 hour or 2 hours, actually, you may not have the time to listen to all the lessons that were delivered in one particular day. Okay, but some people do actually find that time. Personally, I find it very time consuming. So that's why I am more comfortable with reading text using the screen reader. I don't know if I answered your question.
Beautifully, thank you so much. That's really interesting. Thank you. And to dive into some of the questions that are coming up, we've got quite a lot about this second part that we've been discussing about the development, what the future is, and who's involved in pushing for that future. So there's a few questions about what governments can do to spearhead new policies on inclusivity to reach individuals with your needs, but also with other needs as well. So a question of that, how do you see, what is the message to governments, and perhaps in Nigeria, taking Nigeria as an example, what can they do and what should they be focusing on? Okay,
I thank you very much for that. I think the government can take a leaf from what you are doing at MOOC with this literacy study. It drives the conversation and creates the level of awareness, because sometimes these things are done out of ignorance, and it may not be intentional. So having this kind of study and projecting it to the policymakers, and the policymakers in turn need to have that desire to ensure that these things are implemented. In our climate here in Nigeria, we have a whole lot of issues I may not really want to go into, but bringing issues of disability to the fore is one that is going to be really challenging. So as much as possible, we just have to keep pushing and making advocacies for inclusion and policies that are disability friendly, to include them in the process, in schools, in the government as well, and in every sector of the country. Those policies need to be made. They need to be intentional about it. We currently have a disability law that was signed in 2019, and the law gave a period of 5 years for all government establishments to conform to the principles of that law. But trust me, this is 2 years on, and there are no signs that those things are being implemented. So a whole lot needs to be done. It should go beyond formulating those policies. The implementation is really, really important. It's really important.
Emma?
Yes, thank you. My mouse, speaking of trying to navigate, my mouse was not communicating with me. Thank you, Eloka. That's a really important point you make there about cross-stakeholder engagement. And indeed, in the chat, there's been a number of points made about how we need to have everyone signed up to bringing about change. Administrators, educators, government, people in government, and of course, you know, to come back to educators of all shades, right? Those in schools, as in universities, and parents as educators as well. Another question that's come, can governments be encouraged to embrace affirmative action policies on inclusivity? Oh yes, so to reach across the spectrum. So this is I suppose that expands a little bit more, doesn't it, on what we've been discussing. So yeah, I think Eloka Kirk, actually, may I possibly gesture to you? I'm just zipping through the chat to make sure I'm addressing. Is there anything I've missed that we might pose at this point?
No, I think Eloka's speaking very eloquently about these issues, and but I think what I would pose is, you know, the role of government, which you've touched on. I think there's two areas to look at. One is the idea of affirmative action policies. So that's the question on inclusivity at the government level. So maybe two parts. So one is affirmative action at the level of the government around inclusivity for learners across the spectrum with varying access challenges. The other is around at the institutional level. Should institutions be mandated, if they're going to move towards a digital space, should they be mandated to have some sort of inclusivity policy or requirement within a given course before it's released or as part of its development?
Okay, if I get you correctly, your first question is, what can the government do? Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, what can the government do to ensure inclusivity?
Yes.
And
okay.
For example, just Eloka, just to elaborate, maybe it's a bit too wordy of a question, but around affirmative action policies, meaning that there should be perhaps a certain quota of spaces reserved, let's say in universities, let's say in government positions, for people that have, in your case, let's say someone with a visual impairment or perhaps other challenges.
Okay, thank you very much. Like I mentioned earlier, there is a law, disability law, that has been signed in 2019. And that law states that 5% of employment opportunities should be given to persons with disability. Now, the problem is not in the creation of the law. The problem is in the implementation of the law. That, like I said, has been signed, but there is very little being done to the percentage we're talking about. So you can see the gap between formulating and implementing. So who is holding the government accountable to ensuring that these rights are protected. It's one thing to say, all right, I'm doing this, or I will do this. It's another thing to actually do what you have set out to do. And which is why I also talked about the desire to ensure that these things are properly done. The thing I believe here in Nigeria, the thing with disability issues is that people have this feeling or this mindset of, it doesn't concern me since I don't have this particular problem. And
it seems like Eloka has paused or his screen is frozen for a moment. I'd like to just revert back to Dr. Pauncefort and Professor Agbu. Looks like we have Mr. Pastor, Lucky Pastor is back. So it might be an opportunity to engage with Lucky. His audio is connecting. I would like to revert back to the affirmative action policies, especially in the Nigerian context of university access. But I'll revert back to that perhaps. Actually, let me pose that question. So to you, Professor Agbu, as you know, we've worked together and the issue of access to higher education is a big one in Nigeria. So many individuals pass the matriculation exams from secondary schooling, but don't find places in universities. How far can universities or the government support affirmative action policies that are inclusive when you have thousands and thousands of learners that are prevented from accessing higher education? You could say that don't necessarily have, physical or other kinds of disabilities or impairments.
Yes, the issue of access and equity to education in Nigeria is quite topical and constant, I may say, because we have a lot of universities in Nigeria, both public and private institutions, and there is a mandatory entrance examination that each student should take for admission into the higher education. Is called the JAMB examination. And the statistics in Nigeria shows that every year, about 1.6, 1.7, 1.4 students take this exam. But the carrying capacity in Nigeria for admission for all the universities are usually, all the conventional universities are usually between 400 to 500,000. And the question is, what happens to the other 1.1 students out there seeking admission? And because of this problem, the federal government of Nigeria decided to establish the National Open University of Nigeria, and more recently, the dual mode institutions. What we mean by that is institutions that are conventional and also provide online learning. But the National Open University of Nigeria is the only single mode institution, and it has a capability of taking in up to 1 million yearly. So this has actually greatly improved access in university education in Nigeria.
Thanks, Jane. That's thank you. That's a really I think what you're doing is highlighting what a big journey this is for all of us. In the meantime, Lucky joined, but we lost Lucky, and we've lost we lost Eloka, sadly. So I wanted to pull back on, discuss this idea of being more empathetic, because again, that feels like something that's come out very strongly in this discussion, and is something that we're going to come back to in the course content at the end, actually. And it becomes, to my mind, it's an interesting one, because it's less a question of digital technologies than a case of how we as individuals interact. It's sort of a social question about being empathetic in terms of how we structure our teaching and learning, how we think about the impact of our messages when we post messages, etc. And I suppose coming back to the Nigerian context, this idea of situating our digital behaviors and activities in this social context, I wonder, is that a debate that's being had? Is there a sense of we need to really humanize the digital space, or rehumanize it maybe? I wonder what's being said over in your region about this, or is it a topic and a discussion that needs to be started perhaps?
I think it's an ongoing discussion, but like Eloka pointed out, it's not been given the kind of urgency that it's required. In Nigeria, we have quite some policies and statements regarding inclusivity, okay? But we need to, put more effort in this area. And also looking at the effort from institutions, okay? Several institutions should take it as a burning issue and work towards better inclusivity in this regard.
Thank you, Jane.
Sorry, I'm back. Sorry, my network went off.
Back to save us before we start to misguide perhaps. No, thank you so much for joining back in. Yeah. We were just discussing the question of empathy and the debates that maybe are starting or should be started in Nigeria, in the UK, Canada, Malta, and elsewhere. And just that seems a theme that's come out of our discussion, this very, very much thinking about what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, whether it's thinking about needs of access, whether it's thinking about us posting a message online and thinking about how it could be interpreted by someone else. Some of the other questions that have come in, Eloka, I wonder from your teaching experience, you might be able to shed light on this. So we've talked about universities and the adaptations they might make in their courses. What about younger children? What is it? Is it a different question when we're teaching and supporting younger children, maybe who've had visual impairments from birth or adjusting to changing sight? Are there different things that we need to be aware of? What is the learning around that?
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if I'm supposed to say I'm sorry, I keep using myself as an example, but then I guess since this conversation is around digital literacy and visual impairment, and I happen to be visually impaired, it's okay to keep using my experience as an example to answer some of these questions. Now, the learning process for the younger children is pretty much the same. The only problem, well, not really a problem, but then I refer to it as a problem because of the context of the Nigerian state. The problem with teaching the younger children is that you need to pay more attention to teaching, because it's learning Braille is actually a difficult thing to do. So teaching a young child how to read and write Braille to start with, and then carrying that child along in the classroom when you're teaching other subjects needs a lot of attention, because first and foremost, they are children. Even children without disability needs all the attention you can give them to help with the learning process. So it's now 10 times more attention you need to give to a child with a visual impairment, because they really can't see what you're talking about. All they have is the power of their imagination, and some people have more active and vivid imaginations than others. Not everybody's on the same level. So you need a lot of patience and attention to teaching children with visual impairment. And I would just use this opportunity to add here that I'm actually an advocate for inclusive education right here in Nigeria. But the risk of inclusive education right here in Nigeria for a visually impaired child is just like I've explained, having a visually impaired child in the same classroom with their sighted counterparts. The teacher who is meant to teach has to do a lot to ensure that this particular visually impaired child is being carried along. I'll share my experience once more with my secondary school days. I was the only visually impaired person in my class, a class of, well, quite a lot of students actually. And there are times when the teacher would not remember to say what they've written on the board, just like Lucky pointed out in one of his introduction video. The teacher doesn't tell you what's being written on the board. And seeing what helped me then, because I was already aware of my surroundings, I was aware of my space and aware of my challenge. So whenever the teacher doesn't read what's on the board, I ask my seatmates to read it out. But you can hardly expect a young child, to have that sense of awareness, that presence of mind, to be able to ask someone to read it out or call the teacher's attention. You are supposed to read this out. I can't see what you've written on the board. So basically, we need a lot of attention to teach a child at that level. It gets easier as you grow older, just like I've given you with my example in secondary school, because I had the presence of mind to know this is my difficulty and this is how I can deal with it. So I did that a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Eloka. And actually, as you were just talking, I've been thinking about how we connect the dots up between the need and awareness. And as someone has really nicely put in the chat, the sensitization that's required and what practices are already out there that we might borrow, shall we say, or bring into this space. And I was thinking about radio and the radio broadcasters and journalists, especially, or indeed any documentaries or podcasts, always describing, you have some of the sound design and you have the background sound events, etc., but describing what you're seeing and then amplifying it through that audio texture. So it's I'm not aware of, maybe there has this connection's already been made, but it feels to me that there's already learning. Whoever, I consume a lot of podcasts, for example, and I'm always thinking that is a way of you're always having to describe what you see, because in that sense we've only got audio, right?
Yes.
And any thoughts on that? Because of course you're a podcaster as well, or indeed any other areas where are these skills, how do we start connecting this up? What would a teacher training program look like, for example?
Okay, when trying to transfer knowledge or educate a child on areas that you need a lot of explaining to do, would be areas where it's visual. If you don't have any object the child can feel, an object that is meant to represent whatever you are trying to communicate to the larger class. Remember, I am talking about in an inclusive space. So when you are showing pictures or graphics or writings, and you have a child in that environment who is visually impaired, you need to find a way to ensure that child is carried along by describing as much as possible. And in cases where, like I just said, if you have objects the child can feel, for instance, if you draw a shape on the board and every other person can see it, I, as a visually impaired person, I can't see it. And then you go, oh, it's round, it's circle, and stuff like that. So if you don't have an object you could show me that is depicting what you've drawn for others to see, you could take my palm and try to make a circle, draw a circle on my palm, or find other means to ensure that I understand what exactly it is you're trying to communicate to me. So describing does a whole lot. It does a whole lot. I just share an experience. I stumbled across, and this was about 2 years ago, I stumbled across audio described movies. I don't know if anybody's aware of that, but there are actually, I think there's a company or something that does these audio described movies where you have someone describing the action in the movie. Now, while a conversation in the movie is going on, the narrator doesn't say anything. But when there's an action being performed, obviously the voice fades to the background, the voice of the movie, and then you hear the narrator describe what exactly is being done in the movie. So you see that in this area, they've gone a long way in making me, as a visually impaired person, feel part of what's going on in the movie. I actually do understand that, okay, he's walking, he's having a handshake with the person he's speaking with, and all of those stuff. So using that to explain teaching and podcasting or audio learning, you really need to try as much as possible to be descriptive in areas you need to be descriptive in. That's the summary of it.
Thank you. Yeah, now when you say these things, it feels, it feels like we should have all been aware of them long before, but it makes so much sense that what you're doing is you're harnessing the power. We've got other senses, right? And I suppose the argument's always that a lot of us have lost the ability to harness the power of those other senses. And I think what you've very eloquently outlined is the awareness we should have to really use those or use them again where we don't. And I just, as Eloka, Jane, forgive me, I realise I've been firing lots of questions at Eloka. I've got one final one before perhaps I could hand back to you, and then we're coming to the final moments to close.
Yeah.
So as you were saying, as you were talking, Eloka, I was thinking about how your insights highlight different ways in which we teach and really feed into these bigger debates on moving away from the so-called sage on the stage, the teacher being at the front of the classroom, writing on the blackboard, and all the other ways in which we can learn in a learning space, or indeed set up a classroom or a seminar room or a lecture hall. And I was thinking about peer learning, and I wonder whether you've got any experience of successful moments in which either children when you're at school, or other students when you're older, or indeed when we're adults out in the community, how our peers and those around us can support us. And this is really in response to a question about developing countries ensuring inclusivity whilst teaching children in overcrowded mixed classrooms. So how is peer learning, peer sensitization to some of these powerful ways of teaching, is that a route, and have you got any experience of that?
Okay, peer learning, if done the right way and with the right orientation, would help a great deal. Being in a group of people who actually do understand your situation and your learning capacity. I think when I rejoined the call, I heard someone talking about empathy. I'm not sure exactly what the person was referring to, but we need a lot of that. I'm not talking about sympathy now. I'm talking about empathy. Sympathy is when you look at me and you go, oh, you can't see, and you're feeling sorry for me. But that doesn't help me. It doesn't do anything for me. As a matter of fact, it makes me feel worse that you're feeling sorry for me. But when you're empathetic to my situation and you understand you need to carry me along, so it goes from, oh, I feel sorry for you that you can't see exactly what's going on, to, okay, you can't see what's going on. How can I help you feel a part of the process?
Yeah.
Okay, so when that is done, and people understand your needs and empathize with you and find ways to ensure that you are made a part of their world. I say their world now, after a fashion, really, because of what we're talking about. But when you're made a part of that world, you get to understand that your learning process wouldn't be so difficult. Your adaptation to your environment wouldn't be so difficult. There's something I've been working on for the last few weeks when we talk about attitudinal barriers to persons with disability being included in whatever activities. Sometimes some of the exclusions we face is not as a result of our disability, it's as a result of the environment or the attitude of the people within that space. You just assume you have this particular disability, so you can't do it, or you shouldn't be allowed to do it. So when you understand that disability basically is meant to be an experience of the individual and not the person's limitation, as you have decided it's the person's limitation, you come around to understanding that, okay, how do I enable you to be as part of this as much as possible? So peer learning would really help, like I said, if done the right way and with the right orientation.
Thank you so much. And that feels like a perfect encapsulation, really, of the headline message of what we need to take away. Before we go through the last moments, Jane, over to you. Anything to add or to bring to this point?
I think I'm a bit carried away because I'm actually taking notes and learning so much. And thank you, Eloka, for being so kind. The fact that I think you noted somewhere that there's a need for awareness in this area, but it is looking as if well, you noted that this lack of awareness in this area is actually not intentional. Okay, maybe we're a bit ignorant about what we need to do in this regard, inclusivity in our digital world. So I want to employ all of us to continue with this discussion. You go to the chat, the forum chat, and start discussion in this area. And specifically, you need to help us to look at how to broaden inclusivity in our digital world. What do we look out for as educators? And so on. Please, if you have unique experiences in this area, please, you need to share with us, because we have to learn from each other. So I think with that being said, we are almost gotten to the end of the session. Yeah.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Eloka. Just to reiterate my thanks there. It's so valuable to get first-hand experience and to have that. We've been circling around this question of empathy, sensitization, and it's very hard to do so in the abstract. But what you've so eloquently and powerfully communicated are some very tangible takeaways that we can think about and start implementing. And to echo what Jane was just saying about, this is just the start of a discussion, right? Because we've been very much looking to frame this about interrogating the here and now, our use of digital technologies and the pitfalls and what we, the rest of us, are not doing right so far. So at this point, to really encourage you, there's two parts where you can continue this journey, really. There's the discover element, which are Jane's and Eloka's and Lucky's snapshots of this question, which are in the DLLE MOOC in the course content, and that was released on Monday. So that's there for you to see, to listen to and engage with in week 3. And then there's the share element, and I've put a quick link. This is bit.ly/DLLE forum 2. It is pinned to the top of the forum, and it's some questions to guide some of your further discussions. Number one, what is your experience of inclusive technologies? And perhaps this will be an easier question to answer now we've had a little bit more insight. Speaking about this being a priority or otherwise in your institution or region, we've had a very rich snapshot of the Nigerian context. So it would be superb to learn more about other geographies as well. And then finally, what more can we do as educators, whatever educators might mean, and digital creators more generally? And I think that's where our conversation's been circling around. And we started out with this question of us being more aware, but then also us, if we are, for example, the software developer in a video conferencing tool, making sure that those accommodations are made. At this point then, as we just draw to a close, to thank you so much to everyone who's joined us, no matter where you are, whatever time of day it might be. It's a real pleasure to participate in these live sessions and to really bring alive some of the discussions and really further the content that we've been putting up within the MOOC. There is the third session of this course, which will take place next Wednesday at GMT +3, next Wednesday, the 19th of May. And our title for this is Building Inclusive Content and Pedagogical Structures in Higher Education. And we've got the great pleasure to have as our interlocutors, our panelists for that session, Dr. George Adino Onyango and his team at Kenyatta University, Kenya. So do keep an eye out for notifications and details as to how you can register for that one. And at this point, I'll gesture to my colleague, Kirk Kushin, who've been very kindly answering things in the background. A huge thank you, but anything else I've managed to forget at this point?
Emma, I'm sorry, I was toggling back and forth with the chat. Just if you've also encouraged people to go to MOOCit to continue the discussion that came out in the chat. There's a lot of interesting points that are surfacing, and I think just to maybe reiterate that as an opportunity to continue the discussion.
Thanks, Kirk. Absolutely. I'm going to post the link here. There's a space for everyone to join. I can see Lucky is coming in, and it pains me that we're after half four. So Lucky, as you're coming in, my huge apologies that we're coming to the end, but huge thanks to you for your contributions to Jane's videos, and look forward to learning more. And I think that's I suppose the final point to be made is that this really is just the start. So I look forward to expanding on this conversation. Huge thank you. Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you, Kirk. Eloka, thank you again. It's been superb.
Thank you.